from the Crypt.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. This is your boy Marty Bent, back in the studio here at Barstool Sports, sitting with somebody who I would consider possibly the most interesting person I've ever met in my life, in person. Some of you may not know this man. He's a political activist, a revolutionary, some would put forward. He's the co-founder of Democracy.Earth. Great husband, great father, and again, like I said, one of the most interesting men I've met personally, Santiago Siri. Santi, welcome to the podcast.
I was expecting you to mention a completely different name. I'm humbled, man. Thank you.
Oh, stop that. Yeah, so I guess we'll start. I met Santi, in January? Is that when we first met?
I think so, but in Bitcoin years, it's like 1982.
It feels like we'd known each other for at least 10 years now.
Yeah.
So yeah, the way I met Santi, I saw he was moving. I was Twitter stalker. Saw that he was moving to New York from San Francisco. Knew that he was into Bitcoin. Is working on a project that intends to work with the blockchain. And hit him up and said, "Hey, would you like to meet for beers?" And lo and behold, we met at JG Mellon's a week later and had one of the best conversations I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, I was just arriving to New York when we met.
Yeah. And now you're settled. You're settled, right?
Yeah, settled. Pretty happy here. It's a great town.
Yeah, it's it's funny. I never liked New York until I moved here. I was one of those Philly kids who's like, screw New York, and then you live here. It's like, all right, I understand what everybody's talking about. But the reason I wanted to bring Santi in to talk about Bitcoin and sort of what he's working on is because you have a unique perspective. Being from Argentina, you've seen a lot of shit in your day when it comes to economies and politics, and I would love for all the listeners to sort of hear your story and where you came from. So I guess we could start let's go back to Partido de Red.
Close enough. Partido de la Red.
Partido de la Red. My Spanish is going to get better throughout the podcast, I promise.
So Argentina, etymologically, argent means silver. And it's a country that has been obsessed with commodities like silver and other types even since before becoming an independent nation 200 years ago. It was the way where the smugglers of the Spanish Empire used to trade. And it's still a place where there's almost fever about money and finance, and which has led to a culture that has been very unstable regarding financial and banking and governments throughout our young history. Argentina, as most people know, has gone through all kinds of financial crises that you can imagine, like extremely high hyperinflation, to the banks confiscating our savings, to inflation all over again. And that instability, at least for the people of my generation that at least have the advantage of growing up in a democracy, a very young democracy that's 30 years old, has led to the fact that when Bitcoin appeared in our country, at least among the geeks and the nerds that were used to digital technology, was like a no-brainer. I remember when I discovered Bitcoin around 2011. In Argentina, we had 40% of annual inflation rate. The peso was a currency that melted in your hands. You had to spend it quickly because you were not able to use it for savings, and you were forbidden to buy foreign currency. So when Bitcoin came along, it was the way out. It was an incredible no-brainer for us Argentines to start using a currency that and a technology that could liberate us from the coercion of the state and the banks.
Yeah, you hear those stories of people getting paychecks in Argentina and then immediately running to the supermarket to buy as much food as possible so their money didn't lose value.
There were periods when I remember my mother telling me this. I was too young, but the price of the products during the morning were not the same as the price during the afternoon, and not the same during the evening. And that kind of mentality, it's very traumatic for a society. So we are always looking for these kinds of solutions.
Mm-hmm. And so when did you discover Bitcoin?
I think it was around 2011. In 2009, I was already working on digital currencies. I was working on a project that did a reputation-based currency called Woofy Bank, and since then I was obsessed with this monetary history and how technology could disrupt currency. And when Bitcoin appeared, it was like, this is the issue that we needed to address: decentralization, avoiding the central authority, and it was an instant crush.
And I find your story so fascinating because you sort of have this financial background in Argentina where the economy has had bouts of hyperinflation, sort of chaotic and unstable, and then you have sort of this political side of you where you're building a political party that represents our modern times more, an online political party, basically. The Net Party, right?
Yeah, the Net Party.
The Net Party. And sort of seeing where those two collide, what you're doing now with Democracy.Earth has been so interesting to watch unfold over the last, I think I've been following for the last 3 or 4 years.
Let me tell you a story about how the party got started. When I discovered Bitcoin, I think probably the Gawker article was happening around that time. And there was this myth whether you could actually buy drugs online. And, there was this anonymous currency that you could use to get drugs online. So I figured if this is true, this is profoundly revolutionary. The fact that you are able to transact online without banks, without credit cards. And I figured, well, let's check out this Silk Road thing and see if it's real. And I remember accessing the Silk Road for the first time, downloading the Tor browser. Back then, I remember you were able to access this weird .onion site that gave you a blank page, and you refresh, and it wasn't a 404 or some kind of error message. It was just a blank page. So that meant that let's check the source code. And when you looked into the source code, you found the instructions to create a user. And then I figured, well, I created my user, and then I logged into Silk Road, and I saw this entire market of stuff, of knowledge, let's put it that way.
Yeah, because Silk Road, it wasn't only a marketplace. They had a lot of very thoughtful philosophical conversations in the forums for Silk Road, from what I understand.
Fred Pirate Roberts, and like a very wild libertarian anarcho-capitalist agenda. But there were very fun products. I remember one guy that was selling a tutorial to get where you had to click on Amazon, so Amazon ships you a free Kindle, and it sold the tutorial for $1 which was $1 or $2 back then. And there was a picture of the guy with a Christmas tree full of Kindles. And there was stuff like that was a lot of fun. So you could figure out a way of getting a Kindle for a couple of dollars. That guy must be very wealthy right now. And then there were, the substances. I remember making two purchases with a difference of 1 hour because I wanted to check the volume between the IDs of each purchase to understand the size of the... And I remember the distance between the IDs was 1,000 purchases in the span of 1 hour. So it made me realize, like, holy shit, there's a lot of activity happening in this Silk Road thing. And I forgot about it until 2 weeks later I come home. I was single back then still. And I get this envelope from the Netherlands. And I check the envelope, I look at it and I said, holy shit, this thing actually arrived to my home in Buenos Aires. Let's open it. Let's do the unboxing, man. And I started doing the unboxing. I remember it was like a couple of flyers written in Dutch about nonsense. And it had a perfectly sealed, right from the factory of Disney stickers, like Walt Disney, Mickey and Donald stickers. So I opened the envelope of the stickers, perfectly sealed, and there were 4 stickers, Donald Duck, Pluto, and probably Mickey or Minnie. And in one of the stickers, there was a smaller sticker attached to it that had a little hologram that said, "We are anonymous."
Whoa.
And when you remove that little sticker, you had, 2 pieces of, let's call it lysergic acid.
Some mind-altering substances.
Probably. And I remember, a couple of weeks later, a friend of mine was having a birthday, at his house in the countryside of Buenos Aires. So I went there with a bunch of friends and this stuff that I just got from the internet. And, everyone had it that night. And it was very, very strong. Very strong. And, with that friend, exactly 1 month later, we started together the Partido de la Red.
Really?
Really.
Wow.
So, that's a powerful trip, man.
Yeah.
That's a powerful trip. We literally started a political party. We started, figuring out how to hack democracy, build an open source software that would engage citizenship to participate, and understand the processes for legally incorporating the party.
And you created the perfect segue for me. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. So you talk about this a lot. I was watching a lot of your YouTube videos today in prep. If you guys haven't seen Santi's TED Talks, speeches at the World Economic Forum and other places around the world, definitely look them up on YouTube because they're incredible. And one thing you said, I forget which speech it was, but you were talking about how lawyers were the hackers of the last sort of 500-year cycle. They hacked the Constitution and the law and were able to wield the system into their vision. And now you say today's modern day lawyers are hackers who are writing code.
Definitely. I remember saying that a lot in the initial days of the Partido de la Red. If you look into the Congress of any civilized nation, quote unquote, you will find that 60 to 70% of the members of Congress are lawyers. And they are the ones that get to write the law, and they are the ones that they get to, work around the law. And definitely they are hackers of an old paradigm of information technology that is establishing trust through printed contracts. And our speech with the Partido de la Red back then was, let's bring democracy to the 21st century. Let's use the internet to build a much better social contract between the constituencies and their representatives. And our approach was, it was a hybrid approach where we will do the political party, but the political party would have as a secret weapon or ideological basis its open source software, and build an open source software that would have as a secret component of the software a political party. The two things went hand in hand together. So we started the development of the software that was Democracy.Earth, the first version of the software that we did. And the political party ran for Congress in 2013, 1 year later after we started it. We built sort of a momentum around it. Because I was in a radio show in Argentina, I was able to subversively broadcast the information about the party to millions of listeners back then. I did a tech column in a radio show. And we had these weekly meetings every Friday night where it was about alcohol, narcotics, technology, and politics. And as we approached to election day in 2013, it became a movement. And a lot of people joined from a wide range of ideological origins and social class origins, like from all parts of the city. And we started this petite revolution in Buenos Aires of having a Trojan political party that will put a candidate that will respond to what everyone says online with a software.
It's again, like I said, I'm sitting with one of the most interesting men I've ever met in my life. Starting your own political party in a Trojan horse kind of way, and so that's what the whole concept behind Democracy.Earth is liquid democracy, and you talk a lot about how it's nuanced because it's not exactly direct democracy. It's not what we have now.
Yeah.
It's sort of a combination, if you will. And so I guess if you could explain sort of the concept of liquid democracy, how it differs from what we're doing now and how it might look in the future.
So, the experience of starting the party was pretty wild. There's a lot of, beautiful stories to share about, people being incredibly idealistic and a new generation engaging in politics under, a speech that is not the cliches from the left or the right. That meant about, let's bring and use technology to reshape our Congress. But there's a lot of nasty things of doing and being a political entrepreneur in Latin America and in Argentina. Sadly, it's a very corrupt country. We had Secret Service agents infiltrating our party meetings to sabotage them. And
Really?
Yeah, really. I wrote an article specifically, like giving the details about that. They came to the meetings to disincentivize people to keep coming, and they generated a lot of noise and trouble. And they were tied to Secret Service in Argentina in a period where the government was doing a lot of internal spying. We had a federal judge suggest us to pay a bribe so we could run in the 2015 election. We did not run in that election, which, for obvious reasons. So, discovering also a very corrupt and nasty environment, such as politics in general, was a bit of a disillusionment. But in 2015, we got a call from Y Combinator. And YC basically said, come think about democracy, from a global perspective and build the technology for it. And there's where we started the Democracy.Earth Foundation. And with Democracy.Earth, what we're trying to properly understand, other than building technology for 21st century democracy, is also understanding how the internet itself can become a planetary jurisdiction that enables borderless connections, political and economical, between people of anywhere, from anywhere in the planet. And I think we have the means to actually achieve that with censorship-resistant networks, such as blockchains, and the rise of Bitcoin has been an incredibly powerful influence that has led us to actually be able to think in these terms. So with Democracy.Earth, we are building a liquid democracy platform. The idea is for this platform to be, the idea of liquid democracy is that it's a hybrid between representative democracy and direct democracy, where you as a citizen get to directly vote on the issues you care about, or delegate your voting capacity not to a representative you see on TV, but actually a friend or a colleague or a family member that you already know and trust. And simply build the foundations for democratic trust in a peer-to-peer network using tokens on a blockchain. So these relationships are auditable by anyone, and it plays in a very transparent playground. So since 2015, I've been obsessively coding and building this technology, and it's been quite an interesting roller coaster because it's the blend of everything that we have tried in the past with the Partido de la Red and Democracy OS.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like you guys are getting close to an alpha or beta. I've seen on Instagram.
We did a soft, silent release of the 1.0 version. It's in alpha still, but it's a stable release. It's actually, this is exclusive for the listeners of this podcast. If you go to vote.democracy.earth, you will find the live app, and you'll be able to post stuff and delegate, get your votes once you register with with your credentials, and vote on stuff and delegate votes to other people.
That's awesome. Vote.democracy.earth.
Yeah,
getting in a little secret here, Tales from the Crypt. We bring in the good guest. But one thing I wanted to touch on is sort of the censorship resistance of Bitcoin sort of makes this liquid democracy possible, because you can vote and sort of know that it's one person, one vote.
Yeah.
How important is the censorship resistance, and sort of how does it compare to what we have now? So this is what I wanted to talk about. You are very vocal against Facebook and Twitter censorship specifically. They are big data hoarders. They collect a ton of data, and they have a lot of information on all of us. It's something we sort of didn't know growing up with the internet the way we built it in the first iteration. I guess and I'm assuming you would argue too, is that we might have done it wrong up to this point with how we control our data, or how we let companies control our data. And so with Democracy.Earth and the censorship resistance movement, you're sort of pushing people to get away from these data silos. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very evident that the outcome of the last U.S. election, which is the most important election in the world, has led to an awakening that made us all realize how deeply influential social media actually is. By proxy, in anywhere in the world, not just in the US, anywhere in the world, Facebook or Twitter drive electoral conversations, drive political conversations. And their newsfeed algorithms are not accountable to anyone other than the authorities of the company. The network owners are the ones that get to benefit from the likes that we post on these networks. And then it's no coincidence that the only guy endorsing Donald Trump from Silicon Valley was Peter Thiel. So that says a lot about the kind of power that has become centralized in these entities. 2 billion people are using Facebook on a daily basis. That's more people than China, more people than the Islamic religion, or than the Roman Apostolic Church. So it's we need to address this not by reacting against it and banning Facebook or Twitter, but actually embracing the fact that our democracy's playground now lives on the internet. And we need to figure out how to engage in political conversation that triggers real action, that triggers economical transactions or allocation of trust, in ways that are compatible with this new arena, with these new commons that we are unconsciously have been developing for the last 20, 25 years since the internet became so popular. So we are trying to deliver a technology for that. We are in between the fact of redefining politics on a post-nation state world, and at the same time trying to open up the kinds of interactions that have been closed on the Facebooks and Twitters and traditional social media of this world. The like is a token, but the problem with the like token is that it's privately owned by the Facebook corporation. It has infinite inflation. It's very easily subject to all kinds of civil attacks or identity manipulations of all kinds. And it's the one thing that drives advertising budgets, advertising dollars, advertising rubles. So I think that we need to disrupt the like. And with Democracy.Earth, we are trying to build a vote token, and we are very open-minded in terms of what kind of blockchain we can use for it. We can implement a ERC20 token. We can implement. We can use satoshis as signaling votes using Lightning Network. There are many approaches that we are open up to exploring. We have been mostly focusing on the UX side of things, but ultimately we need to address the fact that vote is one of the main verbs of how we interact with society and how we signal decisions and preferences to society. And we need to have a crypto vote operating in this kind of networks that is able to capture political will and address multi-stakeholder decision making anywhere.
And that's what's so crazy about it, because these tools, Twitter, Facebook, they're so powerful. The lines of communication that have been opened up between people all over the world. It's like we touched on it last week with Pierre. Like, we have these technologies in our hands, and we literally, our species cannot comprehend what they are doing to us right now, because our brains are reptile brains. And
what is the species, right?
Yeah.
Is it us, or is it something bigger than us?
We can get into that later. We'll get into some crazy AI theories later. But one thing you touched on is you are preparing for a post-nation state world. What does that look like? What is a post-nation state world, and how are we transitioning into it?
Let's look at the nationalist world for a contrast. It's a world where we have a big crisis regarding climate change. We have terrorist attacks. We have migrations and refugees collapsing in the infrastructure of countries, and we have wars, proxy wars in different locations around the world. And we have these kinds of issues that are all in the fringes of what corporations and nation states can address, because they are competing with each other and they are tied to these political silos. The economy has been pretty much globalized, although for a few. And at the same time, it's a very troubling thing that wherever you are born, you either won the lottery in life or not. If you are born in the US, you probably will do very well in your life. If you are born in Mozambique, you will struggle. So I think that the fact that we have censorship-resistant networks that are rewarding decentralized behavior, that have the incentives to keep building infrastructure that becomes resistant to single point of failures or any kind of central control, and that we are able to build this for the fact that we have the ability to make cryptographic technology that is able to protect these kind of networks. That's an incredible possibility of modern information technology. And in this century that we get to live, that we get to be here on this earth, I think that the great narrative to be built, if we don't want to make the same mistakes of the fascist governments of the 20th century, all kinds of fascist governments on the left and the right, if we want to avoid that trap again, I think that we really need to address the next big chapter of the internet. The first chapter of the internet is this cultural revolution. A guy from anywhere in the world can broadcast his message to anyone at an imperceptible cost. Great. The cultural revolution has been pretty much done since the rise of the World Wide Web and the HTTP protocols. Now the next chapter is about transforming the institutional layer. And institutions, traditionally are a collection of promises that consist of leadership and authorities that enforce those promises that are written in contracts. And those contracts sometimes, the real deals are done, behind doors and among the few powerful, influential people of an organization. And you have a lot of decision laundering happening in traditional institutions and in government. So that leads to a lot of distrust with established organizations. And now we have blockchains, which is this new kind of bureaucratic network where we get to store promises that are transparent, auditable in a permissionless way. In the case of democracy, every voter gets the right to audit the election without requiring any kind of special permission to access the servers or to access the infrastructure or the authority running the election. So that kind of democratization in the process of how we are able to design and build institutions is extremely powerful. Anyone with access to a blockchain anywhere in the world can create a startup that from day zero will be able to be a multinational, will be able to get funding from anyone anywhere in the world, and will be able to tie its performance to either a token or some kind of crypto asset that will drive the incentives of the organization in very creative and new ways that, ultimately this canvas gives us a much broader continuum of possibilities on how we can create organizations and institutions than the, printed era technologies of the past. So I think that the new generations need to embrace this global planetary revolution and take action.
We sort of have a Matrix moment on our hand where Neo's able to sort of, is that in the third one or the second one where they stop, where he meets the architect and he stops what's going on. We've basically met the architect and we're looking him in the face right now saying, hey, we're not going to let this cycle happen again. And that's what blows my mind. And Lewis and I were talking about this earlier. It's one of Bitcoin and blockchain. Like what I'm trying to get through to you freaks out there is that this is one of the best, the most profound inventions of humanity, not just our time.
Oh yeah, definitely of humanity.
And this is one thing I sort of want to delve into now. Like we talked about this as J.D. Mellon when we met up with DeSantis that one time.
Yeah,
and had that crazy conversation. But you talk about, and we touched on it a little bit last episode, but the religious undertones and of.
DeSantis is so good at.
He can draw parallels to that, but if you talk about like the Genesis block and sort of
Satoshi,
the origin story, the Genesis block is sort of like a big bang to, some would argue, life discovering itself. So that's one thing. When we talked earlier in the year, you said you were rereading the Bible, looking for inspiration or sort of parallels, because you had hit a rut at that point. Is that correct?
I started reading the Apocalypse in the Bible right after I moved to New York, and I didn't, probably the last time I tried to read the Apocalypse was when I was a little child trying to look into this devilish book that was forbidden to read, and I probably didn't understand a single thing. But now as an adult, I looked into it again right after moving into New York, and it turns out that it's a book about Babylon and the decadence of Babylon. So it felt very close to home right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible and these kind of sources, when you contrast it with cutting edge technologies such as Bitcoin that have a very powerful creation myth, like Satoshi being this mythical figure that is pretty much disrupting the entire world of finance, if not the entire world, period. I think that there's some clues that you can find in that kind of literature that it's interesting to catch.
Yeah, we were saying that the Bible is sort of a way to bootstrap society. Like if everything were to go to shit and Bibles were to survive, it's sort of a way to...
The Bible was the blockchain of its time. It was a book it required a lot of permissions to actually write something, but you knew that if you were able to get something published in the Bible, it would be there for eternity, right? Because it was the most sacred and the book with the largest hashing power, right?
That is true.
And that was the pinnacle of printed or written technology, of written text. And it's still here. And I think it's, when you touch religious subjects, everyone has very strong opinions about this type of subjects. But I like to address them with an open mind because there's so much we don't know that it's sometimes listening to the voice of tradition can really bring insight into what's ahead of us.
Definitely. I went to a Jesuit high school, and we had to do the history of the Catholic Church, and we actually learned history of Islam and Buddhism and stuff like that. What you learn, there's these themes throughout these religious stories, and they're, like I said, they're helping bootstrap society. So if everything ever goes to shit, you go back to these stories, and it's like, all right, this is how you be a good person. This is sort of the journey you should aim to go on.
When I did my Y Combinator interview in San Francisco, just 3 or 4 days before, I made that trip from Rome, where I, without expecting it, met Pope Francis.
Really?
Yeah.
First Jesuit Pope. AMDG, baby.
Let me tell you this story, because it's not a story that I share in interviews. It's a story that I share with friends. And since we're with friends here, I think it's a good time to share it. I'm part of the World Economic Forum, which is, the establishment club. And I was like a young promise entrepreneur from Argentina that, somehow got into that place, which is an interesting place to meet, extremely influential people from around the world. And the World Economic Forum wanted to lobby the Vatican so the Pope would go to Davos. So they invited me, being from Argentina, the same country of the Pope, as a young entrepreneur, to be part of that mission. And I went to Rome, in this trip I just wanted the excuse to get to meet Pope Francis. He's a national hero in Argentina. And the forum wasn't able to actually convince the church to get the guy in Davos. Every priest there, actually, they were all Argentine priests, they were telling me, it's good for you guys to try. The guy will never go to Davos. But nonetheless, the church agreed that 3 members of the 80 members that flew there from the World Economic Forum, 3 members were going to get the right or the opportunity to give the Pope a letter in person. And those 3 people were a girl from Costa Rica, so a woman would go, a guy from Pakistan, so an Islamic guy would go, and an Argentine priest. And when we were entering the Vatican, and these 3 guys were prepared to meet the Pope, the Argentine priest said, "Oh, I already know Francis. Santi, come you in my place." And he sneaked me in, and he decided not to go to the meeting. And I suddenly found myself with all the bishops of the Vatican, without expecting it, 7 a.m. in the morning. I might have some weed before getting into the Vatican, I don't know. But I get to go to the Vatican, and suddenly I realize I'm about to meet the Pope. And it was quite profound for me. I was like in awe and in shock. And after that trip, I had to fly to San Francisco for Y Combinator. and we had our interview, the famous 10-minute interview, whether they tell you if you are nerd enough to be with them or not.
For those of you that don't know, Y Combinator is a venture capitalist incubator fund based out of San Francisco.
Yeah, pretty much the most famous one for early stage startups. And obviously, we knew that YC was a life-changing thing for us. We were, if we were able to be there, we were able to build the kind of organization that we're building now. And YC accepted us. We did YC later on, and while we were doing YC, my wife got pregnant, Pia, who is also my partner in Democracy.Earth. We have done a lot of things together. So, and my little daughter was born, and the name of my daughter is Roma. So I see this kind of very personal connection between Pope Francis, San Francisco, and Y Combinator, and my daughter being born throughout the experience of starting up in the U.S. As a very, a personal religious experience of sorts, because the causality of events definitely looks weird in my personal story, and it looks miraculous, because having a daughter is the most beautiful thing that you can experience, in my opinion.
It's crazy how things work out, and you didn't only have a daughter; you have a daughter that's going to be in history books someday.
Yes, Roma is the first birth certificate in the blockchain, in the Bitcoin blockchain.
She is, yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Santiago, the day Roma was born, he embedded her birth certificate into the blockchain using a video and testimony, right? You needed a couple witnesses.
It's going to be 2 years on Monday, actually.
Okay.
When she was born, I did this video. This actually is an idea that Ryan Shea from Blockstack gave me. I was meeting with Ryan a week before Roma was born, and he said, "You should do this." And I said, "I will do it, man." Yeah, you should do it. So kudos to Ryan for pointing me in this direction. I did this video the day after Roma was born, where it's me, very tired. You can see me, I'm very tired, and saying I'm Roma's father, and I filmed the birth certificate of her given by the hospital in San Francisco. I filmed Pia, my wife, who's Roma's mother. Then my mother-in-law and my mother were there as witnesses, and they give their information. And then I filmed the screen of my computer that shows the last block in the blockchain, the height of the blockchain and the nonce of the last block in the blockchain, as proof that I was shooting this video at least in that moment of time. Then with that video file, I generate a hash. I use proof of existence, which is a service done by my friend Manuel Arauz from Zeppelin. Mm-hmm. Manu, a great programmer from Argentina. And I hash the video, and it does a Bitcoin transaction that encodes the hash of the video in the Bitcoin transaction. So now I can verify that video actually was made on November 7, 2015, and that none of the contents of that video have been corrupted or changed in any way, or any copy of that video for that matter. So the video works as proof, that the contents inside in it are legitimate, and that it has been shot at least in that moment of time. So it's, in practical terms, it's a birth certificate without requiring authority from the state, from the city of San Francisco, from the Argentine government, from no traditional institution other than my self-sovereign right as her father to, let the world know that she exists. And I just used the Bitcoin blockchain to, demonstrate it.
And it's so ingenious. My favorite part about that video is that you introduce Roma as a citizen of Earth.
Oh, yeah.
A citizen of the world.
So beautiful,
and
right?
It is. And like we were talking about earlier with these technologies opening up lines of communication and globalization, and borders are dissolving, whether Donald Trump wants to accept it or not. But we are breaking down these barriers, and I think more and more people as we go forward are going to start saying, hey, I'm a citizen of the Earth. I'm just some guy. I'm here trying to get through this life like you. You're doing the same as me. We're all going to do this together. These borders, I think you would argue and I would argue one day are going to sound silly looking back.
Yeah, and I think, we can achieve it, and we can achieve it sooner than we can expect it to happen. And, it's like that John Lennon song, Imagine. It's the dream is starting to become very real more and more.
It is, and I don't want to say it's scary that the dream's coming true, but it is chaotic. The dream coming true is a chaotic transition.
It's scary, like all changes.
Yes, that's true.
But I think it's inevitable, and I think we have a responsibility. The internet generation. I hate the word millennials. The internet generation. The generation that is, right from the get-go being raised up with this global consciousness connecting us all is, I think it's a generation that will surprise us in incredible new ways, as it is actually doing with innovations like Bitcoin and all the stuff that is happening.
And yeah, and it's crazy. Again, like I said, it's crazy how fast everything's happening. Like Donald Trump's our president. We've talked about that. Like things are getting crazy, obviously, in the traditional world. And one thing that Pierre said last week when we were speaking is that like he doesn't even pay attention to traditional politics or what's going on there. He focuses on Bitcoin, and that's what I think you're doing very well at Democracy.Earth. Is you're, like you say in your talks, taking the Buckminster Fuller and building a system outside of our existing system.
Build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
Exactly. And that's another message I'm trying to get across in the newsletter. I don't know if you catch this vibe, and with the podcast now, it's like, all right, we've got this technology in our hands, people. We could use it for good. Let's walk down this path. We're at a fork in the road right now. We could keep doing the same bullshit we've been doing for years. Or we could literally, since it's open source, just each person start building something towards this, for this huge decentralized system that could be better than the centralized system that we have now.
We have enormous power in our hands already, and it's a matter of finding the right software with the right configuration, the right networks, the right encryption for us to break free. There's nothing stopping us. There will be, there's all kinds of entities that seek control, but ultimately, I think that there's a physical phenomenon going on with the prevalence of information in our reality, whether it's Moore's law or singularity, or put any metaphor to describe what's happening. But there's definitely a big transformation in human consciousness in a global scale. And I like being loyal to that. I believe in that more than I believe in politicians, more than I believe in traditional power structures. And I think we have this tremendous opportunity literally in our hands.
And one thing I want to note is that the number one thing these technologies are doing in my mind is creating empathy.
Yeah.
You create empathy. You can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and especially with Twitter and live video streaming and stuff like that, you could literally find people that are living in war zones. This is what I found so fascinating about Twitter when I first got on in 2011. I didn't really start using Twitter a lot until like 2012, 2013, when all the Syria stuff was starting. And you could literally go and follow a Syrian who was in Raqqa or in that war-torn area and get their point of view. And that was the amount of empathy that created just by able to click a few buttons and get a first-hand account was something that blew my mind and has created a Twitter addiction. Like, I'm addicted to this empathy creation.
Yeah, it's technology can be a double-edged sword. Also, there's the argument on how much it leads to polarization, and you do find sometimes like endless debates on Twitter that get very nasty very soon.
Finding that out with the block size debate.
not entering or not opening up that door, but I think ultimately it all speaks about human nature, how we are discovering these new boundaries in the space of information. I read this year, and if there's any recommendation I can make, definitely this is a good book to recommend. Called A Mind at Play. It's the biography of Claude Shannon. Claude Shannon is the father of information theory, and he's the guy that during the Second World War, on his spare time, while he was providing services to the U.S. Army, the cryptology division of the the pre-NSA kind of entity that was operating back then for U.S. intelligence, and working at Bell Labs, in that span of time, he came with this paper as important as Satoshi's paper on Bitcoin and electronic peer-to-peer cash system, a paper as important as uncomputable numbers of Alan Turing that gave the primitives that led to the creation of the first computers. And in the Magna Carta of the Information Theory, authored by Claude Shannon, he understands what information is. He's the first one to actually acknowledge the concept of the bit. He actually describes what a bit is, the entropy attached to how we express information, and he basically gave birth to the fact that we can use digital code to express any kind of message in any kind of format. And he was a very low-profile guy, very playful guy that did a lot of weird experiments throughout his life. But he birthed the concept of the bit and understood the reality of information space. And the thing about information is that we are starting to realize that information is as relevant, if not more, than matter when it comes to shape our conscious experience, when it comes to shape the architecture of reality that we are embedded in. Light is a transmitter of information in three-dimensional dimension. So Claude Shannon maybe was something even as big as probably Einstein or Newton when it regards to describe a fundamental property of our universe that we thought it was an abstract concept, the idea of information being an abstraction of reality, but maybe there's a very powerful real aspect to information in the universe. And the fact that how these technologies keep taking over the world, how software keeps eating the world, like Mark Andreessen says, is definitely very telling about the physical properties of information. It seems like there's some kind of gravitational pull that is driving us more and more to get into this new cosmovision of the world and the universe that is driven primarily by information and then by matter.
And my favorite vehicle of this information and this matter is memes.
Oh, yeah.
So you're talking about Claude Shannon's information theory. You couple that with Richard Dawkins' meme theory.
You know what's my highlight, my best moment in Twitter history?
What is this?
When I exchanged tweets with Richard Dawkins.
Really?
I'm not kidding. You can look for it. Just search on Twitter Richard Dawkins Santiago Siri, and you will find my exchange with him sometime in February 2015. I was doing Y Combinator. It was 1 a.m. in the morning for me, and I asked Richard Dawkins if he ever did a psychedelic experience. Being him the champion of atheism, I always wondered, and I always look for this on Google, and I never could find any information or any interview. So I got the chance to ask Sir Richard Dawkins if he ever had a psychedelic trip, and he actually replied and said, "Oh no, I didn't, but a friend of mine suggested doing LSD. Would you recommend it?" And I said, "Yeah, man. And if you want to go into really insightful shit, do ayahuasca." I said something like that.
I had a buddy do ayahuasca the other night in Brazil.
Holy shit.
He said it was an experience.
I did it in the Amazons in Peru.
Yeah. That's one thing. That's on my bucket list. I'm not going to say go out and do all the psychedelics, but I will say psychedelics every once in a while doesn't hurt. I've been on record saying that shrooms changed my life to a certain extent.
Yeah, Steve Jobs said LSD it changed his life, and I think it's a taboo for most of society, this kind of conversation, but I think that slowly and we need to open up about it. There are great philosophers on YouTube that are very alive on YouTube, like Terence McKenna, Alan Watts. Those philosophers are among my favorite ones.
And we're on the right path. We're getting a lot of data coming out right now that psilocybin specifically is helping with PTSD, with troops that come back from war. When they're going through therapy, they're finding that doing a little shroom therapy actually helps them out a little bit. And again, it's crazy. In my opinion, psychedelics just help you realize that there's many ways to view the world.
Yeah, it gives multiple points of view at once sometimes. Like,
Exactly.
like,
Yes.
and you see it in the colors. You suddenly see more colors or stronger hue, or the colors in between the movements that you make, or and you feel the pulse of nature, and the trees seem like more alive. All those sensations that we cannot properly find words to describe them, because they transcend our traditional spectrum of perception, because it has been widened by the experience induced by any kind of these substances. I think these are interesting experiences to engage with, and it's always interesting to get a friend that knows about it and take you on your first trip if you've never done it before. But
It definitely use the buddy system if you're doing this.
Definitely.
Yeah, so definitely try psychedelics if you get a chance with a buddy. But back to the information theory and memes, that's one thing that is getting crazy for me personally, like sort of realizing when you break down a meme, it's basically distilling as much information as possible in a picture and a couple words.
It's an exploit on attention, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a meme president right now. Donald Trump is the ultimate meme.
Memes won the presidency.
Yeah, and it's pretty mind blowing. You get this,
a 4-letter meme, MAGA.
MAGA. When I remember when he won, the first thing I did was like, okay, I need to really understand what's going on here, and I started going deep into the troll army behind Trump. And it was mind-blowing to me that you find these weird, online personas that are, flat out painting themselves in Nazi camouflage without any kind of guilt. And it's very weird, because the trick that they are able to achieve with that is that you can, if you reply them, oh, you're a fucking Nazi. Yeah, I don't care. Why? What's, yeah. Thank you for the news, man. Like, there's nothing you can tell them. Whatever come back, as smart as it can be, it just will, automatically bounce when you deal with this kind of types. And they exploit social media in ways that are, mind-blowing. The whole 4chan army behind it all, it's like an incredible phenomenon.
It really is. It is. And that's what we're seeing today. That's how Trump rose to presidency, and our traditional media doesn't know how to react to it.
No.
They, in my opinion, the best way to react to it is to ignore it. Like, don't give these people any credence.
Don't feed the troll.
Exactly. Don't feed the trolls. But that's what our 24/7 news is right now in America, is feeding trolls. Like,
yeah, pretty much.
And
it's another generation, especially broadcast TV and mainstream media. You can definitely tell that they are from an old era already.
Yeah, and I think conversations like this are an example of sort of new media and a transition away from that, and that's what I'm very excited to see evolve. And that's great. Like, so technology is disrupting everything. Like, software is eating the world. We're talking about how it's disrupting politics, it's disrupting money, it's disrupting media, and trying to keep up with all that happening at once. It feels like we're going a little bit insane. Is that just me, or do you feel that as well?
No, I feel it. You I don't know. Every day you wake up, you check what's going on with Bitcoin, and it's like doesn't feel real.
I was just waking up to 7,500 today. I was like, what the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on? I remember celebrating probably New Year's Eve this year. I remember telling Pia, wow, how cool, Bitcoin is about to cross 1,000. Isn't that cool? We're back to where we were a couple of years ago. And thinking, well, I had, like everyone, I pretend to have all these well-thought economic theories that project the value of Bitcoin. And my theory back then is $100 billion market cap for Bitcoin is doable, and it can happen within the next 2 to 5 years. Holy fuck, it happened like in 8 fucking months, and now it's like, well, let's go for the fucking trillion now. Like, what is going on? And you hear these voices, savvy, experienced investors telling you it's a bubble. Make sure you have all your buckets ready with your distributing your resources in a fair way, because I was there in the 90s, the dot-com bubble. And of course, you want to take a mature approach to it and acknowledge that there's a fever, that there's a lot of speculation, that there's a lot of, a fear of missing out. But at the same time, I am a big believer in fundamentals. And in a world where Equifax gets hacked and 155 million identities get exposed, it's just a matter of time for any kind of centralized entity to experience the same thing.
And the Equifax hack specifically, if anything, should incentivize us to work harder on these decentralized technologies.
I think it's probably the Equifax thing could be argued that is behind this last rally among the many other variables that we can put in the table. But the epiphany everyone is having is, in a digital world, in an information-based universe, intrinsical technologies that understand the properties of information in order to secure value will prevail in the long term than any patch that you can apply to fiat currency or traditional institutions. So when you weigh those things in the balance, it's like crypto is a no-brainer.
A no-brainer, because I posted this tweet on Twitter and a lot of people were freaking out at me like, dude, why did you even say that? So theoretically, hypothetically, these hackers who hacked Equifax, they have 150 million social security numbers, addresses, identifying information. What if they did like a quasi DDoS of the IRS and just started filing claims for people that weren't them and filed multiple claims, and it just became a whole shit show where every claim that these hackers filed was not a correct claim, so the IRS would have to redo everything, and then going forward from there, you wouldn't know what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I think there was a fake website that requested people's information in order to... those attacks will keep on happening. And, the fascinating thing is how many of these attacks happen every day that we don't know. Yeah, banks put a lot of resources on fraud prevention. That's basically, hackers that are exploiting the vulnerabilities that are very basic ones regarding credit cards and banks.
Yeah, they put up like a WordPress with no SSH security on it and it got hacked.
Average Joe never checks for
No, I don't. I mean, it's because it's an extra step. It comes back to UX, but. With Equifax, that's a prime example of the emperor wears no clothes.
Yeah.
And that's, again, we're transitioning here. Power of social media, the power of the internet, and that's another one of the huge powers is everybody is starting to realize that the emperor wears no clothes. They talk a lot of shit. They say they know what they're doing. But at the end of the day, nobody knows what they're doing.
Exactly. I'm all in for, acquiring the capacities that we can to become self-sovereign and start thinking about the world as one. I recently was in Berlin and I found this great book on the Whole Earth catalog, which was this cyber culture catalog back in the 70s that inspired a lot of the digital revolution that happened after. Steve Jobs was famous for quoting it when on his Stanford speech, saying, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." That's the mindset that actually was how the Whole Earth catalog ended on every issue. It quoted that phrase. And the thing about the Whole Earth mentality is this idea that we now have the technology to really think politically, financially, culturally, the Earth as one. There are no excuses left. Anyone can broadcast who she or he or it is to anyone else anywhere in the world at almost an imperceptible cost. And now we're doing that with money, and we'll end up doing that with votes and with institutions and with we need to take this route, because otherwise we can see it on TV very clearly. It's a reality show where people talk about how big their nuke is, and either it's killing each other or outsmarting this.
It's a dick measuring contest for psychopaths.
Yeah,
that's what the political stage of the world is.
Oh
right
yeah,
now. And I'm tired of psychopaths running the world. And if you look at it statistically, to have to want that, not statistically, but to want to have that power, you have to be psychotic to a certain extent.
It's I learned this personally in a very personal level, with starting up a political party in Argentina. I had this, when we had to decide the candidates of the party that were going to run for Congress. You present a list in Argentina, where you have the first candidate, the second candidate, the third candidate. The first one, obviously, being the most important one. And when we were getting close to the deadline of presenting the candidates, I felt, in a very personal level, like the rush and the need to be the first candidate.
Mm-hmm.
I felt the toxic greed of political power. And I felt it because you had people talking to your ears. You get this poison through your ears that tells you, oh, you're going to be the next president of the country. You have the potential to be. And you start to actually drinking your own Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where corruption begins with your own self. And I remember throughout a week or two, I slowly started becoming into this, political animal that wanted to be the first candidate of the party because I started the party and I did this and I did that and I'm, the most popular guy, and I felt it deeply inside me. And thankfully, I was well surrounded back then. An exorcism happened where we smoked a bunch of weed. They got me drunk, and I wept and I said, "Yeah, this is bullshit. I don't need to be a politician." And I learned to laugh about it. But in hindsight, now I look at it and I can see how easily power can corrupt. The temptation of being that guy that gets the headlines, and it's you have to work very strong with yourself to preserve yourself from that kind of temptation, because it really leads nowhere.
Because you're fighting nature at that point.
Yeah.
It's within our nature.
Totally.
It is. We live in hierarchies, and we
have lived in that mindset since forever.
And that's again, like I said, we're talking to the architect. We're trying to actively fight that nature.
Yeah.
And so let's get into that. Fighting our nature. Is that something like we're finally at a point where we can realize that we may need to do this?
Yeah.
So what if we move to like a post-nation state world where there's a lot of sovereign, or everybody's a sovereign individual? What does that look like, and how does that how would that differ from sort of the hierarchical structures that we're used to today?
Wow, what a great question. I think that it's quite challenging to actually learn how to remove yourself from the temptations of power. At least, in Democracy.Earth, when you do the website and you have to put someone who is the CEO and the president and whatever, you have these stupid titles. And I made that mistake myself. And then I realized, no. I will put as a title whatever I like doing most for this organization. And in my case, it's code. I code every day. You can check my GitHub profile. That's what I'm passionate about. I cannot live without coding. So everyone in our website is featured with their own single task. There's the person that does the community stuff. There's the person that does theory. There's the person that does social media. But I think that ultimately, in a non-hierarchical world where everything is miscellaneous, there are no hierarchies, but everything can be everything. It's a matter of how you tag stuff. In that context, I think that everyone should, try to figure out what they like to do and find the means to do it for the rest of your life in a way that you can contributing to society. And hierarchical structures, traditional structures of power, are very are illusions that really don't mean nothing. Because once you get to be that guy, the number one guy, you have power, then you realize it's still a Wednesday 5 p.m. and you have to feed your daughter or take her to the park.
Lewis and I were talking about this earlier. You no matter what title you have, you got to grind. You can have any title in the world, but if you're not doing the work, you're not getting stuff done.
Yeah.
Your title doesn't mean shit. What you produce is what is important.
Yeah. And probably the best thing that you can produce is anything that you are passionate about. And, passion is a component of culture, a component of education, a component of divine inspiration, maybe. But it's definitely something that makes you unique, because if you are good at something, you get to be good at that thing because you have dedicated so much time to it, for the sole reason that your entire self is, cannot live without doing it. And sometimes discovering that takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes 10 years, sometimes it takes 50 years. But I think that you have to keep on looking for it. There's one of my favorite movies is Rushmore, from Wes Anderson. And Bill Murray asks Schwartzman, the character he's playing, Schwartzman asks Bill Murray, "Hey, what's the secret?" And Bill Murray says, "Just find something you like to do and do it for the rest of your life." That's it. And in this world of self-sovereigns, I think we need to... What I like about open source is that what relevant open source technology is technology that is able to understand what hole needs to get filled in the greater scheme of things, and you build on that, and you piggyback on existing open source technologies, or you find a use case for open source technologies waiting to find that use case, and you get to inject your project in the greater constellation of innovations that are happening on this space. So that pursuit, I think it's a thing that you have to exercise every day, identify it, and go for it.
This is something I can attest to. For me personally, with the newsletter, something I stumbled into, sort of.
My favorite newsletter. I read it every day. I cannot believe that you actually send it every day. It's like I don't read the newspaper from Argentina anymore. I read Marty's newsletter, man.
Thank you. I'm honored that you even think about spending some time reading it every day. But that, honestly, this whole story here, freaks. I sort of got backed into a corner and had to do the newsletter out of necessity. I was unemployed for about a year. Been researching Bitcoin for 5 years, was getting to the final round of multiple interviews, I think 6 or 7, and getting shut down. And then finally one day I said, fuck it. I'm gonna start this. If people like it, we'll see where it goes.
Another Bitcoin miracle.
And I think, like I said, we live in chaotic times, but at the same time, there's a lot of clarity coming through as well, where for a fact that your life doesn't have to be chained to a cube from 9 to 5.
Yeah, and it's scary, right?
Yeah.
Realizing, like, I'm practically not getting a salary, in the sense that I've been lucky enough to be on Bitcoin very early on, and it's very counterintuitive to think of my reality financially, in this very weird new crypto context, where every time I have to sell some Bitcoin for survival, it feels like I'm borrowing from the future.
I know that feeling.
And but it's I think that if I was lucky enough to get into this so early, and I feel a responsibility to give back to it, and that's why I try to work on whatever I feel I'm best at contributing to the strengthening of this kind of technology for the world.
And you're working hard towards this. You've been a globetrotter the last few months, from what I can tell on your Instagram. You were just in Germany, you were in South Korea, you were in North Korea, correct?
Yeah, I went to the border with North Korea. That was surreal, man.
What was it like down there? What's going on down there?
It's so strange because it's like this ongoing war that it's this when I was there, a missile went over Japan, and Donald Trump appears in the news every day, and you talk to Koreans and say, young Koreans are like, why don't they die already? And you go through Seoul, and Seoul is a city that has huge avenues, so tanks can move fast in the case there's a war, with enormous subway infrastructure. So if there's a nuclear attack, everyone on the city can go underground.
Could you imagine living in that fear?
It's like going to a chapter of Evangelion. Like a nuclear war is about to start, and the mechas are gonna start shooting each other, and you're in the middle of that chaos. And at the same time, the fascination, that North Korea, such a riddle I remember when I was 20 years old, 19, I went to Cuba for a full month.
Mm-hmm.
And, growing up as a teenager in Argentina, the Che Guevara, the famous Cuban revolutionary, is a very powerful figure because he's this romantic guy that went to fight the revolution, liberating Latin America from American imperialism, right? And I read a bunch of biographies and instantly fell in love with the guy. And so my father, in shock that his son was putting the communist propaganda on his bedroom, my father said, "So you like Che Guevara and communism?" And I said, "Yes, because we need to liberate the proletariat and fight the oppression of capitalist pigs like you." My father was pretty nonchalant about it, pretty cool, and said, "Okay, go to Cuba. I invite you. I will send you there even with a friend of mine who is a Marxist professor from the University of La Habana, so he can show you Cuba better than anyone else." And he actually did that. And I went to Cuba with this extreme left-wing Marxist guy who I didn't know was a friend of my father. I was totally in shock about that. But that speaks about how free the mind of my father actually is. And I went to Cuba for a full month. And I remember, being there and seeing the revolution everywhere. Fidel Castro was on TV every single day. And I landed in La Habana in this house where, it was a former fighter of the Cuban guerrilla. Mm-hmm. And his grandson lived there. His grandson was 17, 16 years old. I was 18, 19, 20. So he was pretty much my age. And he had a little dog. And I asked him, "What's the name of your dog?" And he said, "Linux." What? Yes, Linux. My dream is to get on the internet and to be able to access the internet and navigate and learn about programming. And I want to be a computer scientist when I grow up. I only get 15 hours of internet every day because 15 hours of internet per month because we bribe the telecommunications company guy and we get that time and I get to learn some stuff. And my dream is
15 hours a month?
15 hours a month.
What year is this?
2002, 2003. Okay. And that was a wake-up call. That was like, wait a second. I'm a child of the internet. I feel blessed by the internet. And here's this guy my age who loves computers, who loves information technology, and is struggling to get access to this because there's this perfect political mess that censors free speech. There's a lot of things that you could argue in favor of the Cuban government, like the U.S. blockade. But definitely the free speech, the fact that the only book from an American author published in Cuba was from Noam Chomsky, and nothing else was ever printed there that is after 1990 probably. That says a lot about how they are trying to control thoughts. And in that trip, I started fighting the guy that was supposed to make me fall in love with Cuba. And I recently read the diary that I kept during that trip, and I discovered this conversation that I had with another one of his mistresses because he was in Cuba to fuck around. And I remember talking with her, and she said, "Chico, his dreams are about the past and your dreams are about the future. Don't waste time with him." Because we were fighting every day. And I was 20 and he was 50. But he was a revolutionary, a cliche leftist revolutionary. And I was like, this guy willing to learn about Che Guevara and the Cuban Revolution. And quite frankly, it was a heartbreak. My first heartbreak with politics. And I remember getting back to Argentina desperate to see a shampoo advertising in the streets because I was fed up of fucking Fidel Castro. And the next year I was trading stock in Wall Street and I became a capitalist for a little while. and then I guess I balanced myself. But that's the problem with fanatism. That's the problem when you become ideological, when you become like you have this perfect theory about reality, and then you become a useful idiot. And we need to constantly fight against that because that's what they want. That's what the people in power want. They want to keep us fanatized with them or with their ideology or with whatever device they can find to manipulate the masses, and they are not shy about it. So keeping a free mind matters a lot, and now we get the chance to have a technology that rewards, a kind of freedom that avoids any kind of financial or political coercion, and that's Bitcoin.
And that's an incredible story. Going to Cuba as a Marxist, leaving as a pissed off former Marxist.
It was my sister always tells me that when you came back from Cuba, you were like so depressed, and it was the fact of like realizing my mistake, like swallowing my pride and saying this is bullshit.
It's something we all go through. I mean, like I was a crazy liberal in college, in high school, college, and you go through life. You start getting paychecks. I think that's when every liberal becomes a conservative, but. You have to go through that process. I think you have to test those ideas. You have to explore everything, and you can't be afraid to explore everything. That's like you said. The people in charge want everybody to be complacent, and that's what I would argue. So in Cuba, the complacency was sort of forced on people via communism. Here in America, I would argue we got complacent in the last 4 decades, and it happened via consumerism and people getting not confused but distracted by short-termism. That's what I'll say.
It is. There's a saying in Spanish that it's if you're not a leftist when you are 20, you are insensitive. If you're not a conservative when you are 50, you are stupid. There might be some truth to that, but. The bottom line is, figuring out what really helps improve people's lives, and I think that I'm a big believer in the power of technology for good, for social transformation, for improving what makes us fall in love with life and contributing to society in positive ways. But sometimes learning this stuff takes experience.
Definitely. And would you argue that we're sort of in like a Luddite type of time where we're the new age, like Bitcoin, decentralized systems is butting heads very, very heavily with the old age sort of centralized financial system. And that's why things seem chaotic, I think, to everybody, because you're seeing two diametrically opposed systems sort of butting heads.
The movie is unfolding with the expected cliches. Like the week that Jamie Dimon was trashing Bitcoin and the Chinese central bank was banning exchanges, it was like the perfect storm. And I remember being in South Korea in those days and thinking, fuck, man, this story all over again. And then, in those moments when Bitcoin, I think it went from 4,500 to 3,000. In those moments, you get tested again, whether you believe it or not. Will I buy again or not? But I think Jamie Dimon is playing the perfect Lex Luthor role in this story, and it seems so obvious.
I mean, it is so he can't. I mean, it's actually interesting to see Lloyd Blankenswein, is that his name? The CEO of Goldman Sachs. He's come out and actually been pretty open-minded about
He
Bitcoin.
sees the opportunity of his competitor, saying very stupid shit.
Yeah, and that's what it was interesting to see this week with Lloyd. It was like, all right, here's somebody who's sort of open to this disruption that or if it plays out, will destroy his revenue stream and his business to some extent. But you want to see stuff like that. You want to see people maybe. I would argue capitulation is what you want to see going forward, because you want to convince these people that, hey, this is a better system.
Yeah.
But maybe it's definitely not going to happen overnight, and maybe that's a good thing. So we have time to build that system parallel.
Takes time, I'm learning as I discover my high school friends suddenly texting me about how to buy Bitcoin now after 5 years of me telling them to do it. I guess sometimes it takes time to actually be able to learn about it and to find the time to acquire a skill. So getting convinced about the nature of money is very hard, because you don't want to think that the US dollar is a fraud. you really don't want to believe that, because it's a very scary place to be at.
Yeah.
But once you develop the balls to actually acknowledge the fact that any kind of fiat system is a fraud, well, then you can take action, and that takes time to, those ideas take time to mature, and it's, we have a responsibility being, pioneers in this space, to help teach our family, our friends, our colleagues in the best possible way, what these technologies mean and how they can benefit from it.
And that's the beautiful part of the incentive system set up in these decentralized systems, is that they're feedback loops. So if you are an early adopter or adopted at any point, making more people use the technology makes it more useful, gives it more utility, makes it more valuable. And if it's a technology that's actually better than what we're using now, even better. And that's what I try to do with the newsletter, with this podcast, is trying to educate you guys about this. This is, like we've said plenty of times already, innovation that comes once in humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take, obviously, it's going to take time to transition, but no better time than now to start educating people.
Yeah, and it's a great purpose. It's a great mission, and this is probably the reason we're alive now, in the sense that this is one of these zeitgeist technologies that are shaping the years to come, and hopefully, if we are able to leave any legacy, is in the direction of helping people embrace a world that is more connected, less divisive, more able to to bring us together as the one humanity we actually are. I'm a big optimist. I always been, and I think that great things are ahead as these technologies start unfold and start impacting the world in even greater and more transformative ways than before.
And that's like the most interesting part to think about when you think about this stuff, is once we get to that point where we are a global society and we realize that, and we start going outside of this world.
Yeah,
that's when things start to get very interesting.
Let me tell you a theory of a good friend of mine who has pretty interesting theories about humanity, and he has me thinking about this one, that ultimately whatever code seems to be operating in life in this planet, whether it's DNA or the emergent properties of DNA within culture and within technology and everything we seem to create, seems to point in the direction that we will end up creating some kind of vessel that gets out of this planet and goes into another planet with as much information as we can put in that other planet.
Mm-hmm.
That other planet could be Mars right now, but could definitely be any other planet in any place in the universe in the long term. And maybe that's the way life, tries to expand throughout the cosmos. It's this thing that this thing that goes through molecules and then through biology and then through animals and then through humans and then through society and culture and technology, until it reaches the point of generating some kind of rocket that is able to go into as many other virgin planets as possible, and then the whole thing begins all over again, anywhere else in the solar system or anywhere else in the galaxy or in the planet or in the cosmos. So there seems to be like that pull of life trying to perpetuate itself in the universe. We haven't found anyone else so far, but maybe Satoshi.
Maybe Satoshi. This is one of our favorite theories here on Tales from the Crypt, is Satoshi as an alien or an AI. And that's what our conversation with DeSantis, when he was describing how you could use the blockchain similar to what you did with Roma's birth certificate, but embed DNA information and send out radio waves.
I think we must not discard the theory of Satoshi as alien AI. I think it's one of the most fun, but yet interesting theories to actually look at, as long as we don't know who Satoshi is.
Let's dive into it. So how would you describe this theory?
So, look, when this, let's look at human history. When the European conquistadors took control of the American continent, the American natives, they subverted the natives by giving them these shiny mirrors and these things where the natives could see their reflections, while they completely overtook their power structure and their and they conquered their gold and their precious metals, which for the natives were not that valuable. But economic subversion goes a long way to conquer a civilization. And Satoshi Nakamoto emerges as an entity on the internet that we cannot track to a biological entity as far as we know, and proposes this technology that suddenly sucks $100 billion plus out of the financial system in less than a decade. So if there's any alien species trying to conquer Earth, that kind of financial economical subversion certainly is a very good tactic.
Bitcoin could be the mirrors.
Bitcoin could be the mirrors. Bitcoin, it's I would not deny the fact that this could be a possibility. There are other theories. There's the famous 1996 paper from NSA that describes how to do a electronic cryptographic mint. And it's a paper that describes a lot of the techniques that are being used in crypto. And some people point out to the NSA being behind it all, or maybe a rogue actor of the NSA. But regardless of the authorship behind this idea, this is an inevitable idea. The idea that we can structure blockchains in information space is as inevitable as the idea that we can build computers in information space. Computers, the internet, and blockchains are architectures that live first in information and then get expressed in matter. You can literally build a computer with carbon or with any physicochemical material. These are architectures that are information driven. It turns out that silicon is probably the best material to build computers and to build networks and to build blockchains. But these are inevitable ideas that emerge out of the intrinsic properties of mathematics and information. So one could argue that the fact that we get awoken about these possibilities, that these ideas are embedded in light, which is the main carrier of information. And when there's a great book about Alan Turing, the best biography ever written about him, it's called Turing's Cathedral. And in Turing's Cathedral, George Dyson, the author of the book, right at the end of it, really dares to explore this theory, where he says the most intelligent or the most adaptive way for intelligence to move across the universe is in the form of information. And because information can move at the speed of light, it does not care about the kind of vessel, whether it's a super spaceship or whatever. It doesn't care about form. That. It doesn't care about form. So information goes through time and space. And if you want to put any kind of revolutionary idea out there in the universe, you will put it in the form of information. When people were building the first computers, they were building those computers to calculate the astrophysical configuration of the stars that they were witnessing for the first time with the first, electromagnetic telescopes. So the information to build computers literally came from outer space. And
holy crap!
So we humans, we give credit to our egos for everything. And that's fine. And I admire hard workers like Alan Turing that literally saved humanity from the Nazis. But if we are more open-minded about it, I think that the argument that the epiphanies that led to the creation of computers or the creation of blockchains came from natural properties of information embedded in light that travels across the universe through time and space is a very solid argument about how it's not about aliens. It's about how intelligence gets stored in this universe we inhabit.
It's the universe discovering itself.
Exactly, awakening.
It's so crazy to think about, like, when you break it down to that level. Like,
Yeah.
that's why we should push people to do what you love, because it is a miracle that we're here.
The only truth is love.
That's true. God is love. I'm a big believer in that.
Absolutely. Hell yeah, man.
That's why I end every podcast on peace and love. That's all it comes down to.
You know, I was in this Halloween party last week and I tweeted stuff. Next day I figured out my tweets, and one of the tweets was, whatever you find it, love is the answer. And, you know, it's very true. But we tend to forget about that. We humans.
We do. And it's because the ego gets in the way.
Oh, yeah.
And like we were talking earlier with psychotic politicians and stuff like that, what you have to realize is that the fact that we are alive is a gift. The chances of us being here
It's beautiful.
on this pebble flying through space and
It's
able to have a
beautiful.
conversation where we're talking through microphones that's recording, that we're going to post to the internet, that's going to get sent out later. The chances of us being here right now are so infinitesimal, so small that it is.
It's miraculous.
Enjoy it, people. Just enjoy it.
Yeah.
All right. So we just got deep into the woods there with the universe and life theory, the theory of love. Let's bring it back towards Bitcoin a little bit. I guess what do I want to touch on? I don't really want to touch on the politics of anything right now. I want to talk more about philosophy and how it can help us and how it will help us going forward. So I guess, like Pierre said, we're at the end of the beginning right now, he would say, where we have all this institutional money getting ready to come in. And I guess my biggest question, and what I really am trying to get across with this podcast and the newsletter again, is education. And I'm a strong believer in that everybody should hold their private keys. And do you see a world in which we evolve, or which we move towards, where people aren't storing their coins on exchanges and are sort of own their private keys? Do you think there needs to be hardware that needs to be developed going forward? What needs to happen? You think, like I was telling Pierre, this dude Neil Woodfine, he's not based out of Hong Kong, he's based out of Beijing, but he was saying that Bitcoin, if it's successful, will usher in the next enlightenment. And I sort of agree with that. And do you think people will find out on them by themselves, like how to secure their wealth via Bitcoin, or you think we're going to have like a massive education push?
You know, when I was in London sometime a couple of years ago, and on an official trip, actually, the government of the UK invited me there, and they put me in front of very interesting people, and among them was like the number one guy of British intelligence. And I asked him about what was the philosophy of the UK government regarding the privacy of users, and encryption and whatnot. And he gave me an answer that is very common in crypto, but I learned it back then. That was, he said that the philosophy that they had as a government was to try to teach people about digital privacy in the same way they taught people about hygiene when they were installing potable water in the British sewage system back in the 19th century. In the 19th century, they had to teach people to actually take a bath, to wash their hands, to take care of their private parts, and develop that kind of education so society would be more hygienic and more healthy. And with information technology, it's the same thing. You need to develop your hygiene regarding your data and your private information, and I think that we need to explore a path that helps people learn and become alphabetized regarding how to protect their data. I think that hardware wallets or any kind of technology is always useful in the sense that one day you die and you need your family to take care of your stuff. So in that sense, developing technology that can be trusted and that can be secure enough to prevent any kind of theft or loss, and build the right protocols really matters. Companies like Trezor, I think, and the Ledger and all these new emergent crypto hardware wallets, I think are gonna be very relevant players in the short term, because they are really talking about that practice and making that usage more commonplace.
And this sort of brings us back to the conversation of Internet 1.0 versus Internet 2.0. Do you think we have to start it from scratch?
I think that there's always legacy that you have to deal with. A reset, is always it's not that easy to actually make happen. But I think that definitely on this new wave of the internet, identity is the browser. We are definitely putting our right to control our private information back in the hands of the user rather than in the hands of Facebook or Google. And my sensation is that a lot of people are looking for the next app that is similar to the web, but now using blockchain-based technology. And the difference between successful web-based technology and blockchain-based technology is that any technology that is relevant in the blockchain universe has to be geopolitical. It makes no sense to make a Snapchat for blockchain if it's not driving some kind of institutional transformation on a global scale. Successful blockchain technologies like Bitcoin are geopolitical, because the nature of blockchains impact bureaucracy and institutional realities. And aiming for anything less than that is a waste of time. So in that regard, I think that we need to acknowledge the relevance, the political and economical relevance of these technologies, that they won't be competing against the record labels or the Hollywood corporations. They will be competing against nation states, the IMF, major banks. That's the next big enemy to beat in this new wave of the internet. And if I have to bet on a winner on this battle, I think it's a no-brainer again. I'm pretty much vested on that bet. so yeah.
No, but it's crazy seeing the pushback from like social media. One example I like to go back to is Syria in 2012. Like I was saying, when I got very into Twitter around then, what fascinated me the most about it was when John Kerry in the State Department was thinking about bombing Syria after that YouTube video came out of chemical weapon attack. And at the time, it was very it wasn't very, like, nobody was certain if that video was authentic or not, and there was a good chance that the State Department was going to try to convince Obama to go bomb Syria, and there was a lot of heavy talk about it. But people got on Twitter, they got on Facebook, and they said, "No, like, what are you talking? Like, let's not get into another war here." And the powers that be sort of took a step back from that and wound up not bombing them. But it was interesting to see that sort of just being vocal on these social networks and showing up and being like, all right, no, this sort of like a direct democracy, like voting on Twitter with your likes and retweets, like, don't do this. And
I think that one of the greatest things to figure out in this world where you have bombardments of information happening in front of our screens every day is really developing the kind of systems that can tell truth from bullshit, and that's not easy.
It's not.
You get to see these CGI demos that can suddenly put George Bush or Barack Obama speaking, and you cannot really tell the difference between the simulated one with the real one. This kind of attacks to our attention and to our perception will will keep increasing as artificial intelligence keeps mastering, the uncanny valley. So I think that the great political frontier that we'll be discussing in the 21st century is this frontier between what's real and what's not, what's artificial intelligence and what's human consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And we have to be very hyper conscious about this again, because the whole fake news meme that's been going around.
Yeah.
We cannot create gatekeepers that decide what is true and what is not. It is a personal responsibility. You have to do your research. You have to make it a personal responsibility to determine what is true and what is false. And you cannot rely on these third parties to do it for you. It's as simple as that going forward.
Personal sovereignty.
Personal sovereignty, and that's what it's all about. And I think this is a perfect end point here. It's been a great conversation. Santiago, it's always a pleasure.
It's been one of the best conversations I ever had, period.
Oh, stop it.
No, it's been a lot of fun, and it's good conversation.
If there's do you have a word of, I don't want to say a word of wisdom, a word of advice for the freaks, and a parting note, if you will? For Bitcoin specifically, speaking of Bitcoin, for people that are new to it, like Lewis and...
Hodl. Hodl and hodl. You'll be rewarded.
That's the best advice that's ever been given on this podcast. It's early in the podcast's history, but that's the best advice we've given out so far. Just hodl. Again, Santiago Siri, one of my favorite people on earth. Find him on Twitter at Santi Siri. Si hablas español, compra el libro de Santi Hacktivismo. Puedes encontrarlo en Amazon.com.
That's right.
Again, it's all about love.
All about love.
All about love.
All you need is love.
We're going to end it there. Peace and love, people.
Wow, dude. That was insane. What a trip.